Alrighty, I just want to preface this with the fact that I'm in the library, so if you hear background noises, I'm so sorry. I hope you can hear me. I am using my earphones, and for the most part, I think it gets pretty good audio. Alrighty, so I did for my final project was getting into dyslexia. So the disability, from understood, it's described as a common condition that makes it hard to work with language. Their experts believe that 5 to 10% of people have it. And unfortunately, dyslexia cannot be outgrown, but there are approaches and strategies that have been used to improve people with dyslexia reading skills. So people with dyslexia usually have trouble reading. This doesn't mean they don't have trouble understanding the text, as when people read to them, they are able to understand it. Some of the symptoms, the most common one is just trouble decoding words. They have trouble with matching letters to sounds. They also have trouble with phonemic awareness, and which is the ability to recognize sounds in words. People with dyslexia may often avoid reading too, so sometimes they get anxious or frustrated with reading. Personally, I've noticed this with my students. I don't necessarily think they're dyslexic, as I'm not, a psychiatrist, and I can't necessarily look into that myself. And it might just be the fact that, we've been in a pandemic and it's more difficult for them to read longer words or distinguish them, or sometimes they read too fast and they may miss a word or two, or simply just tell me, I don't know how to read. And quite honestly, I've had that happen to me today, where my student couldn't pronounce the word wisest. He says whist. And I'm like, it does say what? There's an E. He's like, oh, I didn't even see it there. So I'm not sure whether he has it or not, but he does have trouble reading and writing. But just trying to say in general with dyslexia, it's just trouble decoding words. And I feel like I have seen some of it happen, but my students aren't necessarily diagnosed with it. So what causes the disability? So from WebMD, dyslexia is linked to genes. So if a parent, sibling, or other family member has it, you are more likely to have it as well. So the way it presents in preschool years. So from Yale, they most likely have trouble learning common nursery rhymes such as Jack and Jill. They may have difficulty learning and remembering the names of letters in the alphabet. They also may be unable to recognize letters in their own name, and sometimes they may mispronounce familiar words. They instead just use basic words like baby talk. They also don't recognize rhyming patterns like cat, bat, and rat. And they usually have a family history of reading or spelling difficulties. Dyslexia often runs in families. Personally, I have some friends who are dyslexic, and they often have trouble. I remember reading their journals or whatever, reading each other's journals or something, and often they would have trouble with spelling, very simple words. I was very surprised that they would have trouble spelling, but they did. In kindergarten and first grade, reading errors that show no connection to the sounds of the letters on the page. So, for example, they will say puppy instead of the written word dog. When there's a picture of a dog, sometimes they don't understand how the words come apart. Sometimes they complain about how hard reading is. So if a student, for example, asks to read something simpler than a paragraph, or if you ask me to read a paragraph or two, they'll complain and be like, the whole thing? They may have a history with reading problems with parents, siblings, so that's that historical idea of familial history of reading may also be present. They can't stand out simple words like cat, map, and nap, and they don't associate letters with sounds, such as the B with the B sound. From second grade to through high school, so reading. They're very slow in acquiring reading skills. They can be slow and awkward, so often these kinds of students are the ones who don't necessarily like to read, or they may have trouble reading in class. This may just be because they have trouble, they have dyslexia. In other formats, it can also be because they just haven't been used to reading in some very long time. They may have trouble reading unfamiliar words, so often making wild guesses because he or they or she cannot sound out the word. They also don't seem to have a strategy for reading new words either, and they just try to avoid reading out loud entirely. As for speaking, so basically, when they try to search for a specific word, that ends up being just vague, so they'll use words like stuff or thing without actually naming the object, just because it might be easier for them to say. They pause or hesitate or use a lot of ums when they're speaking, so they just avoid saying some words just because of their trouble with saying them. They sometimes confuse words that sound alike. So, for example, saying tornado for volcano or substituting lotion for ocean just because they're easier to use and they're more familiar with them and they're just confusing them. They may also mispronounce long, unfamiliar, complicated words, and they also seem to need extra time to respond to questions just because they need more time to read. Alrighty, and then in school and in life, they may have trouble remembering dates, names, telephone numbers, random lists. They struggle to finish tests on time simply because of their issue with defining words. And they may also have extreme difficulty learning a foreign language, poor spelling, messy handwriting, and low self-esteem that may not be immediately visible, but that doesn't necessarily mean that students with dyslexia may not just show it. Sometimes they will actually show it simply because they don't like to read. Alrighty, so how is it diagnosed? So someone can be diagnosed through a full evaluation, which is done either at school or privately. Though it has been said by understood that if it's done privately, it might be more expensive. School psychologists, clinical psychologists, and neuropsychologists assess the people to test their brain to see whether they do have dyslexia or not. And evaluation in other areas also looks to see where the strengths and weaknesses are in the brain and in reading and speaking skills. Alrighty, so as for treatment, so educationally, teachers are able to treat a student's dyslexia by using techniques that involve hearing, vision, and touch that in the long run help students' reading skills. Bottom line, this kind of treatment helps the children and adolescents best when it comes to recognizing sounds and make up words, comprehending what they are reading out loud, which also helps them build accuracy and just building vocabulary. There are some also natural ways that can also be used. So other ways to treat dyslexia have been through complementary or alternative medicine, also known as CAM. This kind of medicine focuses not just on the issue at hand, but rather on healing the whole person. So there are two ways in which this kind of treatment has been said to work. One way has been through hearing. So since dyslexics do have difficulties with auditory skills, CAM users sought out to use special headphones that give them different frequencies to retain the auditory system. Another is having people with dyslexia use metronome, which is kind of the little instrument that goes tick, tick, tick. And as they read, since they do too have problems with focusing, it does help them with their reading. Using the metronome also allows them to become centered and focused. And on top of it, oftentimes people with ADHD may also have dyslexia, so using the metronome can also be helpful for that as well. Alrighty, so other natural ways I also found was royal jelly. So royal jelly is an excellent source of vitamin B. These are important nutrients for the childhood brain development, so they're better to be taken as a child. It also has to be like a preventative treatment for dyslexia in children, although it is genetic, so I'm not quite sure whether this one would work or not. Bee pollen is another one which is important for childhood brain development as well as royal jelly. Bee pollen is a safe dyslexia natural remedy for both children and adults. This is, I'm going to mispronounce it, but yotishmati, I'm sorry, is a natural remedy traditionally used for improving concentration and memory and retention, which can also help improve dyslexia in children. Alrighty, so when it comes to accommodations, there are a variety. I'm just going to list a few. There's some other focused ones I want to look at as well. So some general accommodations. So verbal instructions are repeated just to make sure that the student got it the first time, the second time, and the third time. Large print should be seen in both virtual or paper items that are given to the student. Verbal answers can also be given to the teacher rather than an answer sheet, just because it might be easier for them to do that. Students are able to point out to their answer or type them instead. Students should be able to work individually or as a group. They need less visual auditory distractions, so seating arrangements can be made. On top of that, they should be given extended time for assignments as well as frequent breaks as they need them. Alrighty, so one of these specific ways to accommodate, so a tape recorder. Obviously, this is just one option. There are other ways as well, which I will get into. So directions can be told, directions, stories, and other lessons can be recorded. The student can replay the tape to clarify understanding of the instructions given. This can also improve reading skills because the student can just read the printed words silently as said on the tape. Another option is to also video record a lesson so the student can rewatch on their own as well. Also, just getting more into the small amount of work, I can tear the pages for the materials or upload virtual versions on them online that might be a little bit shorter. These materials can be shortened to minimize the anxiety from having to do a lot of units of instruction and information. A lot of words tend to overwhelm them. It can also highlight sections that are the most important or cross off sections that are also necessary. Writing a glossary. So this is an interesting one. A glossary can basically help students understand specific language of the content. So it's not necessarily a super long glossary. It would just be, a list of like 10 words or less about the content we're going to be learning, and I can also just put like vocab and warm-ups, use them in sentences, have them use them in sentences, have non-dyslexic students read their sentences from the warm-ups, just for further reinforcement and memorization. Furthermore, I can also provide a list of vocab words with the pronunciation in parentheses before we get into the text and of the background. So there are plenty of ways in which students are able to be accommodated for this specific disability. Unfortunately, because there are no true 100% remedies that are going to take it away, accommodations are the best thing that we could do for our students with this disability, and I hope for the best that there will be maybe a cure one day, but it is genetic, so that might be difficult, but the hope is still there, and I hope these students are able to reach what they're supposed to do, but teachers can only do so much, but we can do a lot for our students when we try. And my references are right here. I had to make them in 2 just because it was quite long, but thank you. And thank you so much for the semester. I appreciate it.